The scream cut through the Manhattan afternoon like a knife. "Mom, don't get in the car." The words were ragged, desperate, and the kind that belonged to someone fleeing a burning building, not a janitor sprinting across a corporate plaza. Evelyn Hartman froze mid-motion, her hand inches from the chrome handle of her armored sedan. For a heartbeat, everything around her. The churn of taxis, the murmur of foot traffic, the flutter of paper in the wind fell silent, as if the city itself held its breath. Mason Graves reacted first. The security chief broke formation with a velocity that defied his age, crossing the concrete in 3 brutal strides. His partner was right behind him. They collided with the man in the gray maintenance uniform, Jack Turner, slamming him against the limestone flank of the Hartman Biotech Tower. Keys scattered across the pavement, bouncing in metallic panic. Jack choked on a gasp, his cheek pressed to stone. But he didn't look at the guards. His wide, terrified eyes locked on Evelyn, as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff he alone could see. "Ma'am," Mason said sharply, positioning himself between her and the man stepped back. "Now." Evelyn didn't move. Shock pulsed through her, like an electric current followed by a rising anger that burned cold and bright. She was the chief executive officer of one of the most powerful biomedical companies on the East Coast. She was not accustomed to being ambushed in front of her own building. "I am already late," she said, voice taut with steel. "Explain why a janitor is screaming at me in the street." Jack twisted against the hold of the second guard breath, coming in broken fragments. "Don't let her get in. The car, it's not safe." The phrase punched through the air with chilling clarity. Not safe. In Evelyn's world, those words were not metaphors. They were operational alerts, code-red trigger points for the protocols drilled into every member of her security detail. Mason's eyes hardened. He looked at the sedan, then at Jack's stricken face, and the last trace of doubt vanished. "Lock down the vehicle," he ordered. "Call the police. Call the bomb squad. Full perimeter." "No," Evelyn snapped, stunned by the absurdity. "This is ridiculous. He is clearly unstable." "Maybe," Mason replied evenly, "but we do not gamble on maybe." Within minutes, chaos bloomed across the plaza. Sirens wailed. Police cruisers sealed off the block. People gathered at barricades, phones raised like hungry eyes. The sedan sat alone in the center of it all, ominous in its stillness. Jack knelt on the pavement, hands cuffed behind his back, his shoulders sagging under the crushing weight of what he'd done. Or what he'd tried to prevent. He watched the bomb squad robot inch toward the car, its mechanical arm reaching like a probing question. His throat tightened. He had not planned this far. He had only known one thing: Evelyn Hartman could not be allowed to sit in that car. He thought of Lily, 8 years old, brave, quiet, her hands trembling when she held her crayons. He thought of the neurologist's words, soft with hopelessness. The phrase he would never forget: degenerative progression, faster than expected. He remembered the shredded documents he'd pieced together in the dim custodial closet 2 nights ago. The name of the experimental trial, the name of the researcher. And finally, the one that had made the blood freeze in his veins. Mark Hartman, Evelyn's younger brother, his daughter's life and a stranger's life, had collided in a way he still didn't fully understand. But he knew enough to know danger when he saw it written between the lines. Evelyn watched from inside the lobby, fury coiling in her chest. Her afternoon's meticulous architecture had collapsed into ruins. She was meant to be on her way to a private airfield for the most important, most secret meeting of her career, one she had waited nearly 2 years for. Instead, she was trapped behind glass, shackled by the actions of a man whose name she barely recognized. When the verdict came, an hour later, no explosives, No threat. Nothing. Evelyn stepped outside, heels clicking like a countdown. The officers pulled Jack to his feet. "You're looking at a felony," one warned. "False report. Inciting public panic." Before he could finish, Evelyn raised a hand. "Stop." Mason moved to speak, but she silenced him with a look. She approached Jack, her gaze sharp enough to carve stone. "You have 5 seconds," she said softly. 5 seconds to tell me why you did this. If your answer does not satisfy me, I will ensure you spend the rest of your life regretting it." Jack's chest heaved. Every instinct screamed at him to shut up, but the thought of Lily's fragile smile pushed the fear aside. He forced the words out. Neurocell degeneration syndrome. The effect on Evelyn was instantaneous, a barely perceptible flinch, a crack in the armor she wore like a second skin. Mason's head snapped toward her, confusion flickering across his usually unreadable face. Jack saw the shift, the tiny fracture. He had struck the truth. For a moment, time wavered. Then Evelyn straightened her composure, snapping back into place with terrifying precision. "Release him," she told the officers. "He is now a corporate matter." "Ma'am," he committed, "we will not be pressing charges." Her voice cut clean and final. "Transfer custody to Chief Graves." Jack felt the cuffs loosen. His wrists burned raw with friction, but the greater pain was the knowledge that he had just crossed a line he could never uncross. As Mason gripped his arm and guided him toward the tower's gleaming entrance, a cold realization slid through Jack's spine. He was no longer dealing with law enforcement. He was now in the hands of Evelyn Hartman, a woman who possessed more power than most governments. A woman who, if he made one wrong move, could erase him from the world without leaving a ripple. And yet, as he glanced back at her, he realized something else. For the first time since this began, Evelyn Hartman was afraid. Jack Turner sat alone in the glass-walled conference room on the 47th floor, its panoramic view of Manhattan stretched beneath him like a glittering, indifferent constellation. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of ventilation. But Jack felt as if the air itself were pressing down on him. His uniform was damp with sweat. His pulse tripped unevenly. He had never been so high up in a building or so far removed from anything he understood. Mason Graves stood guard by the door, arms folded across his chest. His face held the cool stillness of a seasoned protector. But his eyes, sharp, assessing, betrayed a question he hadn't dared speak aloud. "Who exactly are you?" Jack couldn't have answered even if asked. He didn't know what identity he was wearing anymore. A janitor, a desperate father, a whistleblower, a criminal. Time stretched around him, elastic and cruel. Every minute that passed felt like another minute Lily was waiting for his call, another minute he wasn't beside her to ease the tremors in her small hands. He swallowed hard. "Can I use my phone? I need to call my daughter." "No," Mason replied, his tone flat, not unkind, but immovable. "No communication until Miss Hartman authorizes it." The sting of helplessness bit deep. Jack glanced at the window. The city pulsed below, alive, unaware, unstoppable. Somewhere out there, Lily was probably drawing in her sketchbook, the way she always did when she missed him. She drew crooked castles and sunlit trees and little animals she wished were real. He imagined her asking Mrs. Henderson why Daddy hadn't called yet. His throat tightened. The door clicked open. Evelyn Hartman entered without a sound, her presence slicing through the stale tension like a blade. She dismissed her assistant with a slight nod, and the door sealed shut behind her. Only then did she turn to face Jack. Up close, Evelyn was more formidable than she had appeared on the street. Her posture was faultless, her expression carved from willpower and expensive restraint. But beneath that polished veneer, something trembled, something raw she was fighting to keep buried. She didn't sit. "You will explain to me," she said. Voice low, precise, how you know the name of a disease that is classified under multiple federal-level confidentiality agreements. Jack straightened instinctively. He had expected anger threats, maybe even disbelief, but not this cold, surgical demand for truth. "My daughter Lily," he said, his voice shaking despite his effort to steady it. "She was diagnosed 6 months ago." The tremors started slowly. Then the weakness. The neurologist said there's no cure, no treatment, nothing except waiting for the progression. But I didn't believe that. I couldn't. Evelyn's eyes flickered. The crack widened. Jack continued, the words spilling now that the dam had fractured. "I work at night. I clean the labs, the offices. A few days ago, I emptied a shredder bin and found papers that weren't completely destroyed. Graphs, notes, names." He swallowed. "I saw your brothers. Mark Hartman." Silence rolled across the room, heavy as a storm cloud. Evelyn's world tilted. She had spent years protecting Mark, shrouding him behind layers of privacy and corporate firewalls. She had bankrolled a secret program with ruthless determination, funneling millions into a research team she believed could save him. She had stayed awake countless nights, staring at his medical charts, until the numbers blurred. To hear a janitor say Mark's name here now was like having her grief dragged into daylight. She forced her voice steady. "And what exactly did you think you discovered?" "That the treatment isn't a treatment," Jack said. "Your trial isn't helping him. It's killing him." Mason stiffened. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. "I pieced together enough to see the pattern," Jack said. "Mortality rates hidden in the appendices. Chemical compounds that don't match public patents. Payments going to a consulting firm tied to a researcher who was stripped of his license for manipulating trial data." Evelyn drew in a slow breath through her nose. The room seemed to shrink, the air thinning. Jack finished quietly. "They're not saving your brother. They're using him. The same way they want to use my daughter eventually. I couldn't let you get in that car because I think they planted something. Not a bomb. Something else. Something that would make sure you couldn't interfere." Mason turned sharply toward Evelyn, alarm finally cracking his composure. But Evelyn didn't flinch. She was staring at Jack with a focus so intense it felt like heat. For years, she had believed in the trial in Dr. Adrian Finch, in the shimmering promise of a scientific miracle that could rewrite fate. She had ignored the red flags because hope had blinded her. Now a janitor a man's society looked past, without a second thought, was standing before her, presenting the truth she had refused to see. And he was doing it with the quiet conviction of someone who had everything to lose. "What you are claiming," Evelyn said softly, "is devastating." Jack met her gaze. "So is watching your child fade." The words landed like a blow. Something inside Evelyn, some buried shard of fear, shifted and broke open. She moved to the opposite side of the table and finally sat, her hands folded like a general preparing for war. "I need Lily's medical records," she said. "All of them." Jack stiffened. "Why, she's not part of this." "She is now," Evelyn replied. "You have made extraordinary accusations. I must verify your foundation before I decide what comes next." Jack felt his blood run cold. "You're not letting me leave this building, are you?" "No," Evelyn said, unblinking. "Not until I know whether you are my greatest threat or my only ally." The words landed with the gravity of a life sentence. Yet beneath the chill, something else glimmered in her voice, something Jack wasn't expecting. Not suspicion, not rage. Recognition. Because in that moment, Evelyn Hartman saw him clearly, a man dismissed by the world, underestimated, overlooked, and yet possessing a truth powerful enough to crumble everything she thought she knew. A man dangerously easy to ignore. A man impossible to forget now. And for the first time since the chaos began, she understood something terrifying. Jack Turner might be the only person standing between her and a disaster far larger than either of them. The moment Evelyn Hartman left the conference room, the silence collapsed in on itself. Jack Turner stood at the obsidian table staring at the city far below. His reflection warped and stretched across the glossy surface. He looked like a man held together by frayed threads, one breath away from unraveling. He paced the length of the room, palms damp heart, hammering in a rhythm that belonged to prey, not a fighter. Every minute trapped here was a minute Lily was alone. She hated thunderstorms, and even though today's sky was clear, the world must have felt loud without him. He imagined her looking at the clock, waiting for his call. He imagined her hands trembling the way they had recently started to tremble more often. The door clicked open. Not Evelyn Mason Graves. The security chief stood in the doorway, like a monument, one hand resting on his belt, the other loosely curled at his side. His presence filled the room, a quiet, unwavering force. "Ms. Hartman wants an update," he said. "If there's anything else you haven't told us, now's the time." Jack almost laughed, a sharp, cracked sound he swallowed before it escaped. "I've told you everything." Mason studied him for a long, unblinking moment. Men don't risk their lives for nothing, especially men with daughters. Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was stamped all over him: exhaustion, fear, love, desperation. Mason tapped his earpiece. "Ma'am, he's still asking to call his child." The reply was faint but unmistakable. Evelyn's voice clipped and controlled. "Put it on speaker." Mason lifted his phone, dialed the number Jack gave him, and held it out. Jack felt his lungs constrict as the line rang once, twice. Then came the small voice that always undid him. Daddy relief crashed through him so hard his knees nearly buckled. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm here." "You didn't call after school," Lily said. "Mrs. Henderson made me noodles. I saved some for you." His eyes burned. "I'm so sorry, Lily. Something happened at work. I have to stay longer than usual." "Is it the bad kind of something?" she whispered. He swallowed hard. "Not for you, baby. Never for you." Mason stood, rigid gaze fixed on the window, pretending not to listen. But Evelyn, 5 floors above, listened to every syllable, her expression unreadable, as she stood in her office with the intercom on. Lily continued. "I drew you a picture today. It's a castle. It has a big door to keep monsters out." Jack's breath shook. "I bet it's perfect." "You keep that castle safe, okay? I love you so much." "I love you too, Daddy." The call ended. Jack sat heavily in the nearest chair, face in his hands. His entire body trembled, the weight of his choices pressing down until he could barely breathe. Mason's stare softened just slightly, just enough to suggest the man wasn't made entirely of stone. Before Jack could recover, the door opened again. Evelyn returned, a tablet in hand, her steps sharp with urgency. "I received Lily's medical files," she said. "They match your claims. All of them." Jack looked up, eyes red, bracing for whatever came next. "But that is not the only reason I came back." Evelyn moved closer, her voice lowering. "I found financial records within my own project. Hidden transfers, ghost invoices, payments to someone I never approved." She paused. "A consultant named Corbin Vance." Jack recognized the name instantly, the disgraced biochemist. "I confronted Finch," she said. "He lied. Poorly." Mason straightened at her tone. Evelyn rarely used that voice. It was the voice she used when choosing between destroying an enemy or burying a truth. "I am no longer certain my brother is safe in that facility," she continued. "I am no longer certain the trial is anything close to legitimate." Jack felt a surge of vindication, but it was hollow, swallowed by fear. "I need to see everything Evelyn said. Every detail you discovered." Jack hesitated. He hadn't shared the entire story. Not yet. The truth had felt too insane, too enormous to say out loud. But now the door was open. He told them about the shredded papers, the diagrams with chemical sequences that didn't make sense, the mortality charts hidden in the margins. He told them about the timeline inconsistencies, the misaligned dates, the suspended protocols. He told them about the phrase buried in one corner of a page, the one that made his stomach drop: post-transfer clinical disposal. Mason inhaled sharply. Evelyn went still. "Disposal," she repeated. Of what Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment, just one. When she opened them, the storm had hardened into resolve. It was as if someone had opened a trap door beneath her denial, and she had finally fallen through. "I am calling a full internal investigation," she said. "I want every file, every acquisition, every subcontract reviewed." "If Finch has falsified anything, he has," Jack said quietly. Evelyn studied him, the weight of his certainty pressing against her own instincts. For years she had trusted Finch. For years she had funneled money and hope into his hands. But now, a janitor, someone the world dismissed, had seen what she had been blind to. She turned to Mason. "Prepare the jet." Mason blinked. "Ma'am, we are going to the North Valley Research Facility. I want eyes on my brother. Tonight." Mason hesitated only a second before nodding. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn looked at Jack. "You're coming with us." Jack felt his heart jolt. "Me? Why?" "Because you saw what I did, Aunt," she said. "Because you understand their systems. Because you may know the weaknesses I never considered." Then, after a beat softer, "Because I trust you more than anyone else right now." Jack stared at her. He had not expected that. Not from a woman like Evelyn Hartman. Not from someone who owned skyscrapers and scientists and stock portfolios larger than small nations. But the truth was simple. He was the person who had shattered her illusions. And the one who could help her rebuild the truth. "Tonight," Evelyn repeated. "We leave tonight." Jack exhaled, a shiver of dread curling in his stomach. He had wanted to save his daughter. He had not meant to step into a war. The jet sliced through the night like a silent blade, its interior dimmed to a muted glow that cast long shadows across polished surfaces. Jack Turner sat rigidly in a cream leather seat near the rear, gripping the armrests as though the plane might tilt him into the sky at any moment. He had never set foot on a private aircraft before, let alone one belonging to the Hartman family. Everything smelled faintly of leather and something colder power. Across from him, Evelyn Hartman sat with her posture perfectly straight, every line of her face carved by concentration. The tablet in her hands flickered with medical graphs, coded financial ledgers, and internal messages she had never seen before tonight. Information was her kingdom, yet suddenly she was unsure which parts were real and which parts were poisoned. Mason Graves sat at her right, analyzing blueprints of the North Valley Research Facility on a second screen. The man looked carved from granite, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed the truth he was preparing for war. The plane hummed onward, a distant whisper against the rushing wind. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice softer than Jack expected. "Tell me about Lily." Jack blinked, caught off guard. "Lily, you are risking everything for her," Evelyn said. "I want to understand why." He hesitated. He had spent years keeping his life small, quiet, hidden. Opening up felt like stepping into bright light after too long underground. But Evelyn's eyes were steady, not demanding, not cold, but searching. Jack drew in a breath. She's 8. Loves drawing. She thinks the sun wakes up in the morning just to say hello. She wants to be an astronaut because she thinks she can find a star to name after her mom. He paused. His voice went husky. Her mom died 3 years ago, and since then, Lily's been everything. Evelyn exhaled slowly, and Jack knew she understood the kind of love that rewires a person's soul. After a moment, she spoke again, but this time about herself. My brother Mark, he used to sail. He said the ocean made the world feel bigger, like there was space for problems to shrink. Her voice wavered just one note, but Jack caught it. On the last day, he was conscious enough to tell me what he wanted from life. He said he wanted to feel sunlight without pain again. Then she fell silent, blinking once, as if sealing the memory away. No one spoke for several minutes. The jet continued its whispering ascent, carrying 3 unlikely allies toward a nightmare Evelyn had only just begun to face. When they landed in a clearing of the private airfield, the night was deep, starless. Pine trees loomed at the edges of the runway, like silent witnesses. A black SUV waited for them, engine idling. As they drove toward the facility, Mason outlined the plan, though his tone suggested he disliked every part of it. Their main gate will be guarded and logged. We're not using it. According to the infrastructure maps, there's an industrial runoff conduit that connects the lower lab levels to a drainage culvert in the woods. It's narrow, not meant for ingress. But Turner believes knows Jack corrected quietly. Mason gave him a measured glance, but nodded. Knows that the filtration system shuts down between 2 and 4 in the morning for scheduled cleaning. That's our window. Evelyn looked at Jack. How narrow is the conduit? Jack swallowed. 28 inches, maybe 29 at the wide sections. She absorbed that without flinching. We crawl. The SUV rolled to a stop in a patch of dense forest. The facility was visible in the distance, low, menacing, surrounded by fences crowned with razor wire. Floodlights washed the compound in stark white. Evelyn gazed at it, her jaw tightening. That is where they told me Hope lived. No one replied. Hope had teeth now. They reached the drainage culvert hidden beneath a tangle of brush. The smell of chemical residue wafted from the metal grate. Mason cut through the rusted bars with a bolt cutter, the sound sharp in the quiet night. As they descended into the concrete pipe, the temperature dropped several degrees. The air was damp and metallic, thick with the memory of chemicals. Jack led the way on hands and knees. The space pressed in on all sides, amplifying every breath, every scrape of fabric, every heartbeat. Behind him, Evelyn crawled without complaint. Her breaths controlled her movements, efficient. Mason brought up the rear, a silent bulwark. Minutes stretched, their clothes soaked with cold residue. Jack's muscles shook with exertion, but he forced himself forward. He knew what waited for him at the end of this pipe. A man with the power to destroy his daughter's future or save her. Finally, they reached the vertical grill leading to the sub-basement. It was supposed to be dark, still empty. But instead, a harsh white light illuminated the concrete floor beyond the bars. Jack froze. 2 men were inside, dressed not as guards, but as something worse. Tactical gear. Silenced submachine guns. Movements clean and economical, like predators accustomed to running operations in shadows. They were loading sealed biohazard containers onto a freight platform. Mason's whisper was razor thin. These men aren't facility security. Jack's stomach plunged. They're accelerating the disposal protocol. They're moving everything now. Evelyn's breath hitched, though she kept her voice steady. Including my brother. Mason reached for the hydraulic spreader to pry open the grill, but then stiffened. He stepped back slowly, like someone backing away from a ledge. "No," he murmured. "We step out there, they will cut us down in seconds. They have full sight lines." Evelyn clenched her jaw. "We need another entrance." Jack pressed a hand against the concrete wall, searching the map burned into his memory. The ductwork, the old pathways, the abandoned sections. Then it hit him like a thunderclap. The supply shaft. Evelyn turned to him sharply. "What shaft?" "A dumbwaiter system on the north wall. It runs vertically through the facility. Not on patrol routes. They used to store non-sterile supplies there before the upgrade." Jack pointed left. 20 yards that way. Mason narrowed his eyes. Wide open floor, exposed. "We make a diversion," Evelyn said. She looked at Mason. "Can you trigger something loud?" The security chief pulled out a compact electromagnetic disruptor. "I can blow the lighting junction in the east corridor. It will pop the bulbs and set off alarms." Evelyn nodded. "Do it." Mason aimed the device through the grill, timed the rhythm of the soldiers' movements, then whispered, "On my mark." Jack braced himself. 3, 2, 1 mark. A blinding flash detonated through the far end of the basement. Glass shattered. Alarms wailed. The two armed men whipped around, weapons raised, sprinting toward the noise. Mason kicked out the grill. "Go now." Evelyn grabbed Jack's arm and pulled him into the open. They ran. The 20 yards felt like 100. Boots slamming against concrete. Breath tearing out of lungs. Shadows slicing across the floor as red emergency lights flickered on. Jack slammed into the north wall, fingers scrambling for the dumbwaiter handle. It stuck for half a second, then gave. They piled inside the cramped, greasy shaft, Mason last. He slammed the door shut as a beam of a tactical flashlight speared across the wall where they had just been. Jack hit the up button. The shaft jolted, chains rattling as they ascended into the dark. Below them, shouts rose like the roar of an awakening monster. The dumbwaiter rattled upward, a cramped metal coffin, climbing through the bowels of the North Valley facility. Every jolt sent vibrations through Jack Turner's bones, and every metallic groan reminded him that they were drifting deeper into danger, with no way back. The air inside was stale thick with old grease and cleaning solution, the kind of scent that stuck under fingernails and in the back of the throat. Evelyn Hartman stood pressed beside him, close enough that he could feel the tension rippling through her frame. Her face, illuminated by the emergency lights, flickering outside the shaft, was composed but far from calm. She held herself together with pure will. At the back of the cramped space, Mason Graves braced his broad shoulders against the wall, the controlled stillness of a man trained not to flinch even as the world tilted around him. The dumbwaiter jerked violently, metal screaming against metal, and then stopped. Not a smooth halt, more like the mechanism had been choked mid-motion. For a heartbeat, they existed in suspended silence. Then came a faint sound that was almost peaceful. A soft, rhythmic squeak. Wheels. A gurney. Jack eased forward and cracked the metal door open just an inch. A blinding wash of white light flooded in. A hallway stretched out before them, sterile bright, the walls too clean, too controlled, like a place designed to hide sins behind the sheen of disinfectant. 2 orderlies pushed a gurney down the corridor, moving briskly. A shape lay beneath a white sheet, completely still. Beside them walked Dr. Adrian Finch, his eyes sharp with urgency, every movement clipped, impatient. He tapped his watch, muttering under his breath like a man racing a countdown. Evelyn saw him and froze. Her breath hitched, body tensing, as though something inside her had shattered. "Mark," she whispered, voice splintered from the inside. She lunged for the handle, wild instinct driving her forward. Mason moved instantly, catching her with a force that kept her from bursting into the corridor. His fingers closed around her shoulder, pulling her back mere seconds before the bright beam of a motion scanner swept across the hallway. If she had stepped out, she would have been illuminated in full view. No, Mason warned. Not like this. That is my brother, she hissed through clenched teeth. And you will lose him if you rush, Jack said. His voice steadied, even though his heart thundered. Evelyn didn't turn toward him, but something in her expression cracked. She watched as the orderlies guided the gurney into the freight elevator. Finch stepped in after them, his posture rigid. The doors slid shut with a heavy clang that echoed down the corridor. The moment they did, Evelyn sagged against the dumbwaiter's wall, a sound escaping her that did not belong to someone accustomed to command. "We're too late," she whispered, barely audible. Jack shook his head, emotions sharpening into certainty. "No, that wasn't your brother." She lifted her head as though waking from underwater. "What are you talking about?" "It was a setup," Jack said. "Too obvious. Too exposed. If Finch was really disposing of Mark, he wouldn't use a main hallway with cameras. That was for show. A false trail." Mason's eyes narrowed. A ghost movement. Evelyn looked from one man to the other, her breath quickening. Then, "Where is he?" Jack reached for the tablet in her hand, flipping open the facility blueprint she had studied since the jet. He scanned the schematic with the urgency of someone searching for the last key to a locked door. His finger landed on a dull gray block at the far end of the 3rd floor. There, an old surgical theater, decommissioned. It has its own elevator shaft, not connected to the main grid. "A ghost exit," Mason murmured. Evelyn swallowed, eyes glinting with new, brittle hope. "Then we go now." They slipped out of the dumbwaiter like shadows emerging from the walls. The hallway felt too bright, too exposed. Each footstep sounded like a threat. Evelyn moved ahead with deliberate precision, Mason covering their rear gun, drawn eyes sharp. Jack followed, every sense on fire. When they reached the decommissioned wing, they found a set of heavy steel doors sealed with a glowing red maglock. No windows, no seams. A closed tomb. Evelyn pressed her ear to the cold metal. For several seconds, she stood absolutely still. Then her eyes widened with a flicker of pain and disbelief. A soft beeping came from inside, weak, uneven. A heart monitor. "He's alive," she whispered. But the door remained unmoving, stubborn. Mason examined the keypad and shook his head. It would take tools they didn't have. Jack scanned the wall, looking for anything out of place. Something caught his eye, a dusty metal panel near the floor, ignored for decades. Emergency atmospheric purge control. His pulse thudded. "We can force the door open," he said, "but it will be risky." "Explain," Evelyn ordered. "If we activate the purge, the room will lose air. They'll have 30 seconds before suffocation. They'll be forced to open the door." Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Do it." Jack ripped open the panel. Dust plumed around him. Inside, a thick lever waited locked in place. He grabbed it with both hands and pulled. The lever dropped with a heavy snap. A deep vibration rolled beneath their feet as turbines roared to life. Warning lights exploded overhead, bathing the corridor in urgent crimson pulses. The heart monitor inside shrieked. Furniture crashed. Something slammed against the door. With a sudden violent hiss, the maglock disengaged. The door crashed open. Dr. Finch stumbled out, gasping, face purple from lack of air. Behind him, Corbin Vance followed, terrified. Mason disarmed and forced both men to their knees before they could recover. But Evelyn was already inside. The surgical theater was a hollow chamber filled with machines screaming in distress. Mark Hartman lay on the table, pale as paper, his chest rising in small, fragile motions. Evelyn reached him, her hand trembling as she touched his own. "Mark," she breathed, voice breaking. Jack scanned the equipment, his eyes locked on a small, almost hidden IV bag, dark amber wrong. Without thinking, he ripped it from the line. The heart monitor spiked, then steadied into a weak but stable rhythm. It was working. Mark was alive. But the hallway thundered with approaching footsteps, armed men rushing toward the breach. Mason shouted a warning. Evelyn lifted her head, fear and a fury twisting together. The rescue had happened, but survival was just beginning. The footsteps drew closer, heavy, synchronized the sound of trained men moving with lethal purpose. The alarm still pulsed in frantic red, bathing the surgical theater in a warlike glow. Mason Graves stepped into the doorway. Bracing himself against the frame weapon, raised his voice low and sharp. "They're here, all of them." Jack Turner's breath locked in his chest. He could hear the men now moving fast, speaking in short bursts of code boots, hammering against the tile. Evelyn Hartman stood over her brother's gurney, fingers trembling as she steadied the portable monitor. But when she lifted her head, her eyes burned with cold, absolute determination. "We need an exit," she said. "Now!" Jack scanned the room, desperate. Machine steel counters, abandoned equipment, and then he remembered the blueprint. "There's a service elevator behind the sterilizers," he said. "Old, unmarked. It should lead to a lower loading bay." Mason didn't waste time, then move. They shoved aside a wall of bulky steel autoclaves, their metal casings screeching across the floor. Behind them, half hidden by grime and age, was a square metal door with a heavy latch. Mason kicked it open. A small elevator car sat inside, barely large enough for a gurney and 3 people. A thunderous impact slammed into the main surgical door. Metal buckled inward. The armed cleaners were using a battering ram. Jack rushed to the autoclaves, helping clear the path. Evelyn gripped the gurney handles, her movements fierce, protective, as if she were holding onto Mark's life itself. The second hit came harder. Screws popped, the window cracked. Mason fired a short burst through the widening gap. A man cried out. More shouted in response. "They're seconds away," Mason warned. "Get Mark inside," Jack said. "Now." Evelyn and Jack maneuvered the gurney into the cramped service elevator. Mark's pulse monitor beeped weakly but steadily. Finch and Vance, still bound with restraints, cowered behind the unit, pale-faced and trembling. Mason backed toward them, firing again, covering their retreat. The door behind him began to give metal tearing like paper. He threw himself into the elevator last, slamming his hand onto the down control. Nothing happened. For a split second, dread froze the air. Jack lunged, spotting the manual override lever on the interior wall. He yanked it with all his strength. The elevator jolted violently, then lurched downward. The main door burst open at that exact moment. Muzzle flashes lit the hallway. Bullets shattered loose glass and ricocheted off steel as the elevator doors screeched shut inch by inch. Mason returned fire through the narrowing gap covering until the last sliver of light disappeared. Then the freefall began. The elevator dropped like a stone. All of them were thrown sideways. Evelyn slammed into the gurney, Jack into the wall, Finch and Vance screaming. The cables shrieked overhead, sparks raining as metal scorched metal. The descent seemed endless, a plunge into darkness with no bottom. When the crash came, it hit with bone-rattling force. The lights went out. Dust rose in a choking cloud. For a moment, there was only silence filled with groans and coughing. Jack forced himself upright, fighting the ringing in his ears. "Everyone alive?" Evelyn's voice answered, hoarse but steady. "Mark's still stable." Mason grunted as he pushed debris aside. "We need to move before they figure out where we fell." Jack pried open the twisted elevator doors. Beyond them stretched a cavernous underground loading bay, dim cold lit by only a single dying bulb. Crates were stacked along the walls. An idle delivery truck sat near a rolling metal door, its keys still in the ignition. "Perfect," Jack said. "We can get him out." Evelyn turned toward Finch, who was slumped against the wall, blood on his mouth. The doctor lifted his head with desperate eyes. "You don't understand," he rasped. "You're making a mistake. I can help you. I can help Lily. I can save her." Jack stared at him, heart pounding. Lily's trembling hands flashed through his mind. Her small voice on the phone, her fragile strength. For one terrible moment, temptation flickered. Then Jack shook his head, voice low and cold. "You already had your chance. You used it to kill people." Finch's face collapsed. Mason nodded once, grim approval in his eyes. Evelyn looked at Jack with something deeper, recognition, respect. Together, they guided Mark's gurney toward the truck, the path ahead uncertain, the danger still rising. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Jack felt the faintest spark of hope. They weren't running anymore. They were escaping with the truth. They were stealing back a life, and they were not about to stop. The delivery truck roared to life with a guttural engine shudder that echoed through the underground bay. Jack Turner slid into the driver's seat, wiping blood from his brow with the back of his hand. His fingers shook, but he clenched the wheel until the trembling stilled. Evelyn Hartman and Mason Graves maneuvered Mark's gurney into the back of the cargo hold, securing the portable monitor as it beeped in fragile rhythm. Finch and Vance sat bound in the corner, their breaths loud with panic. The air tasted like dust adrenaline and impending collapse. Jack slammed the truck into gear. The rolling bay door loomed ahead, locked, chained shut, fortified. He pressed on the accelerator anyway. The engine growled. The truck surged forward. Mason braced himself against the wall. Evelyn gripped the gurney with both hands. Finch screamed something Jack didn't bother deciphering. The impact hit like a cannon blast. Metal shrieked as the door buckled inward, then ripped free from its tracks. The truck burst into the pre-dawn dark, dragging a mangled frame of steel behind it. Cold air rushed in, stinging Jack's lungs as he floored the accelerator and tore down the narrow access road. Behind them, alarms howled. Shadows flickered across the facility's exterior as men spilled from side doors, weapons raised too late. Bullets pinged off the back of the truck, ricocheting harmlessly as Jack swerved into the tree-lined branches, slapping against the sides. The sky was turning the pale gray of early morning, but the road ahead remained a twisting ribbon of darkness. "Are they following?" Jack shouted. Mason forced open the rear door a few inches. The world blurred past him. Trees fogged the distant facility, bathed in emergency lights. He scanned the road behind them with the trained eyes of a man accustomed to being hunted. After a tense beat, he closed the door. "No pursuit," he said. "For now." Evelyn exhaled a breath she had been holding for too long. She knelt beside Mark, checking his pulse with steady fingers. Her expression softened, but her voice trembled when she spoke. "He's stabilizing." "Jack, if you hadn't been there," Jack didn't answer. He just tightened his grip on the wheel and kept driving. The road wound through thick forest before opening onto a narrow paved lane. The truck jolted over cracks in the asphalt, its suspension groaning. Jack pushed it harder, needing distance, needing time, needing air. When they finally emerged onto a main service road, he tugged the truck to an abrupt stop behind a cluster of overgrown pines. The engine ticked in the silence. Evelyn climbed into the passenger seat, her face streaked with sweat and tears she hadn't noticed falling. She held her satellite phone. "We call the authorities now. There's evidence, witnesses, enough to bury Finch and everyone helping him." Jack nodded. Mason moved to guard the rear. Evelyn dialed a number from memory. When the line connected, her voice shifted into something hard as steel. "Director Evans. This is Evelyn Hartman. I am declaring a clear and present threat at the North Valley Research Facility. Illegal experimentation, attempted murder, armed resistance." Her hand shook slightly, but her voice did not. "Deploy a full federal response team. Quarantine protocols. Yes, immediately. I will send coordinates." Jack watched her, realizing that in this moment, she wasn't simply a CEO. She was a force capable of reshaping the world around her, and she had chosen to fight. Within minutes, a distant rhythmic thrum rose in the air. It grew louder, sharper, until the tree canopy trembled. Jack stepped out of the truck, gazing upward. Black helicopters cut across the horizon like blades descending in formation toward the facility they had fled moments before. Their spotlight beams carved the forest in sweeping arcs. The cavalry had arrived. Evelyn climbed out beside him, her hair-disheveled eyes shadowed yet somehow stronger than she had been hours ago. "They'll secure the site," she murmured. "Find every piece of evidence, every record." Jack nodded, but his mind wasn't on the facility anymore. He turned toward the road ahead, toward the sun beginning to creep over the horizon, toward Lily. "Can I borrow your phone?" he asked quietly. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before handing it to him. Jack stepped a few feet away, trying to steady his breathing. He dialed the number he knew better than his own heartbeat. It rang once before a small voice answered. "Daddy." His eyes burned. "Hey, sweetheart. You sound tired," she said. "Are you okay?" "I will be," he whispered. "I promise." "I drew you a new picture," she said. "It's us, and a big tree, and sunshine." A smile tugged at Jack's mouth, breaking something fragile inside him. "I can't wait to see it." "When are you coming home?" "Soon," he said. "I'm coming home very soon." He could hear her smile through the line. It steadied him more than anything else could. When he handed the phone back to Evelyn, she met his eyes with a gratitude that went beyond words. The quiet moment shattered when Mason leaned out from the truck. "Agents are on site," he said. "Looks like they've secured Finch and Vance." "Alive?" Evelyn asked. "Alive," Mason confirmed. "Barely." Evelyn nodded. "They'll talk, and when they do, we'll have every name, every account, every detail." Jack looked toward the horizon, watching the flood of helicopters darken the sky like a coming storm. "What happens now?" Evelyn stepped closer, her gaze drifting to the open truck where her unconscious brother lay. "Now," she said softly, "we save them. Mark, Lily, everyone this trial was supposed to help." She drew a steadier breath. "I'll rebuild the program from the ground up. Transparent, ethical, real science." Jack studied her profile, struck by the fierce clarity in her expression. She wasn't just fighting for her brother anymore. She was fighting for something larger, something that had been broken long before tonight. Mason approached with a grim nod. "Evac team's ready for Mark." Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Not all of it, but enough. Evelyn turned toward him. "You're coming with us." Jack blinked. "Me, you're part of this now," she said. "Whether you meant to be or not." He held her gaze for a long moment. Behind them, the rising sun stretched golden light across the treetops. Ahead lay hospitals' interrogations, rebuilding healing grief justice, and beyond all of that possibility. Jack nodded. Then, let's finish this. Evelyn allowed herself the smallest, fragile smile. The world around them buzzed with rotor blades and federal commands, and the clash of authority reclaiming a stolen secret. But for a fleeting second in the thin gray dawn, 3 people stood together, scarred, exhausted, but unbroken. They had survived the night. Now they would confront the day. The world did not quiet down after the North Valley raid. If anything, it grew louder. Investigators swarmed Finch's network like a storm breaking over rotten earth, uncovering falsified case reports, unauthorized human trials, hidden financial channels, and a trail of corporate rot stretching farther than anyone had guessed. News anchors spoke his name with a mixture of shock and disgust, and their voices sharp with the thrill of scandal. Protesters gathered outside Hartman Biotech's headquarters, demanding answers, justice, punishment, reform, depending on which sign they carried. And through all of it, Evelyn Hartman stood at the center like the eye of a hurricane, calm, but restless, battered, but unbroken. The woman who once commanded boardrooms with icy precision now spent her days in conference rooms with federal investigators and her nights in the hospital watching over her brother. Jack Turner lived in that same rhythm, caught between chaos outside and a fragile calm inside. When he wasn't answering questions for agents or signing statement after statement about what he had witnessed, he sat beside Lily in the hospital's family room. She always brought her sketchbook, always insisted on drawing while she waited for Jack's updates about Mark. Always asked the same small but heart-bruising question. Is he going to be okay? Jack didn't lie. He simply said, "We're trying everything." And that became their tether, trying, hoping, holding on. Mark Hartman's recovery was slow, painstaking, but unmistakably real. Specialized teams flew in from across the country to assess the damage Finch's toxins had done. Geneticists and neurologists collaborated under the banner of the newly formed Hartman-Turner Initiative, Evelyn's creation, though she named it after the man who saved her brother and the child who had unknowingly set the entire story into motion. And as the therapy evolved, Lily became one of the earliest test candidates. Her tremors, once a constant shadow, began to soften, then retreat. At first, the changes were small, a steadier grip on her pencil, fewer breaks between breaths, the ability to hold her cup without Jack's guiding hand. But after several weeks, the improvement grew impossible to miss. Her laughter was freer, her drawings more intricate, her energy brighter. She began to feel like a child again, not a patient strapped to the weight of a failing body. One quiet afternoon, Evelyn arrived at the hospital unannounced. She didn't bring her laptop or her phone or her polished corporate armor. She wore a soft gray sweater and jeans, her hair loose in a way Jack had never seen before. She looked human, a woman stripped down to her core, her defenses lowered. Jack was pacing the hallway outside Mark's room when she found him. He had barely slept in 2 days. Worry clung to him like another layer of clothing. Evelyn studied him for a moment before speaking. "You need rest. So do you," he replied, rubbing at his eyes. "You're here almost as much as I am." "I'm here because you didn't let my brother die," Evelyn said softly. "You're here because you refused to let your daughter fight alone." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Let's sit." They settled in the chairs near the window, overlooking the city. The sky was painted in the fading gold of late afternoon. Evelyn clasped her hands in her lap, looking down at her fingers as though searching for the right words. "Do you know what the hardest part is?" Jack shook his head. "It's realizing I didn't see it," she murmured. "Finch, the lies, the danger. All of it was right in front of me, and I was too desperate to save Mark to admit the truth." She drew a slow breath. You saw what I couldn't. Jack looked at her, studying the quiet vulnerability behind her composed facade. You were doing what you thought would save him, he said. That's not blindness. That's love. Evelyn's eyes lifted, meeting his. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding shaped by grief, fear, and a shared fight neither had chosen. Before either could say more, the door to Lily's room swung open. Lily herself raced out, waving a new drawing. Mason Graves limped behind her, still recovering but solid as ever. Lily stopped in front of Jack and held up her picture with a proud grin. It showed a house under a sprawling oak tree. 5 stick figures stood in a line: Jack, Lily, Evelyn, Mark, and Mason, all holding hands beneath a smiling sun. Jack felt his throat tighten. Evelyn stared at the picture, her expression softening in a way he had never seen before. Mason huffed out a small laugh. She added my cane, he said. Good eye for detail. Lily tugged on Jack's sleeve. Can we visit Mark now? I want to show him. Jack nodded. Let's ask Evelyn. Lily turned to Evelyn with big, hopeful eyes. Please, Evelyn knelt to meet her gaze. I think he would like that very much. They entered Mark's room together. The monitors still ticked steady rhythms, but his cheeks held more color than before. He was awake, sitting up slightly, eyes brightening at the sight of visitors. Lily rushed to him, placing the drawing in his hands. Mark's fingers trembled as he traced the figures. This is beautiful, he whispered. You're quite the artist. Lily beamed. Jack stood at the foot of the bed, watching Mark interact with his daughter, feeling something inside him loosen a knot he had carried too long. Evelyn stepped beside him, her voice low. You gave him a future. Jack shook his head. You gave her one. She turned toward him. The light hit her face just right, revealing tired lines, soft edges, and something warmer than gratitude. What happens now? He asked quietly. Evelyn looked at her brother, at Lily, at the fragile miracle unfolding in front of them. Now, she said, we rebuild. All of us. Outside the window, the sun dipped lower, casting the room in a warm, amber glow. Lily laughed at something Mark said, the sound ringing clear and bright. Mason leaned against the wall arms, folded, a tired smile tugging at his mouth. Jack exhaled slowly. The world wasn't fixed. It wasn't safe. It wasn't simple. But for the first time, it felt possible. He looked at Evelyn, and she looked back with the same truth in her eyes. Whatever came next, they were no longer walking alone. And that was enough. In the end, this story reminds us that true courage rarely comes from those with power, but from those with something precious to protect. Jack Turner was never meant to be a hero yet. His instinct, love, and persistence exposed a truth that entire institutions tried to bury. And Evelyn Hartman, once shielded by wealth and authority, learned that real strength lies not in control, but in confronting the uncomfortable, even the unthinkable. If this journey moved you, I'd love for you to stay with the channel. A simple like or subscribe helps these stories reach more people who need a moment of escape, a spark of hope, or a reason to keep believing in resilience. And before you go, drop a quick comment with just 3 words or fewer. Let's use "keep fighting."